My daughter-in-law set a plate of food in front of me and said, "We figured you'd want to contribute more around here given everything we do for you." I was sitting at my own kitchen table, in my own house, the house I'd lived in for 31 years. I didn't say anything. I picked up my fork and I ate. But that night, lying in the dark in the bedroom where my husband and I had slept for 3 decades, I made a decision. Not an angry decision. Not a sad one. Just a quiet, clear decision. The way you decide to finally see a doctor about something you've been ignoring for too long. I want to start at the beginning, though, because the beginning matters. My name is Vivian. I'm 68 years old. I taught high school English for 26 years in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I retired 6 years ago, the spring before my husband Raymond got his diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He was gone 11 months after they found it. I won't dwell on that part. Raymond was a good man, steady, funny, in a quiet way, the kind of person who remembered what you ordered at a restaurant from 3 years ago. Losing him was like losing the floor under my feet. For a long time, I just stood very still so I wouldn't fall. We had one son. His name is Kyle. He's 43 now, works in logistics, married a woman named Amber 7 years ago. They have 2 children, a boy, 9, and a girl, 6. I love those grandchildren. I want that to be clear because nothing that comes after should be read as anything other than what it is. For the first year after Raymond died, Kyle called every few days. He'd drive out on weekends sometimes, fix things around the house, sit with me on the porch. I was grateful. I told him so. I thought we were doing all right, the 2 of us finding a new shape to things. Then Amber got pregnant again. They lost the baby at 14 weeks. I flew out to be with them. They'd moved to Phoenix 2 years earlier. Something about Amber's job, and I stayed for 3 weeks. I cooked, I cleaned, I watched the kids so Amber could rest. I didn't talk much. I just stayed close. When I flew home, Kyle walked me to the security line, and he held on a little longer than usual. He said, "Mom, I don't know what we'd do without you." I thought he meant it the way you mean something when you're grieving. I didn't know yet that he meant it differently. About 4 months later, Kyle called me on a Tuesday evening. He asked how I was feeling about the house. Was it too much, rattling around in a 4-bedroom by myself? Had I thought about what I'd do long term? I told him I hadn't, really. The house was paid off. I had my pension and Raymond's life insurance and our savings. I wasn't rattling. I was fine. He said that he and Amber had been talking. They thought it might make sense for everyone if I came out to Phoenix. They had a guest room. The kids would love having me close. And given what had happened, Amber needed more support than their friends and neighbors could give. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I thought about the women at my book club, about my neighbor Sandra, who brought me soup for the first 3 weeks after Raymond died, about the church I'd been going to for 20 years. I thought about my garden and the way the light came through the kitchen window in the morning, but I also thought about Amber's face after the loss. And I thought about my grandchildren, and I thought, maybe this is what family does. I said yes. I rented out my Columbus house rather than selling it. That was my one condition, and Kyle agreed without hesitating. I want to note that he agreed easily. At the time I read it as generosity. Looking back, I think he was relieved I wasn't selling. I moved to Phoenix in October. The guest room had its own bathroom and a small window that looked out at a block wall. I brought my books and Raymond's photograph and my grandmother's quilt, and I told myself this was an adventure. The first few months were all right. I picked up the kids from school 3 days a week. I made dinner on the nights Amber worked late. I helped with homework, read bedtime stories, bought groceries. I didn't mind any of it. I liked feeling useful. But there were small things I noticed and set aside. Amber had a way of redoing whatever I did, refolding the towels I'd folded, rearranging the dishwasher after I had loaded it, correcting the way I'd cut the children's sandwiches. She never said anything directly. She would just quietly undo and redo. I told myself this was her house and her way of doing things. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Then the grocery thing started. She asked me, very nicely, if I could take over the grocery shopping. She was busy, I had the time, and I knew what the kids liked. Of course. I started doing the grocery shopping, I paid for it myself. It seemed like the right thing to do. I was eating there too. A month went by, then another. Then Amber mentioned, still nicely, that she'd noticed I always used my own card. Did I want to be added to their account? And she smiled when she said it, I could just keep handling it myself if that worked for me. I kept handling it myself. The gym membership was next. They had a family membership, and I was using the guest pass, which had a monthly fee. Kyle said gently that it would be cheaper if I just got my own. So, I got my own. Then Amber needed a new car, and the insurance was going to go up across the board, and Kyle just mentioned, that it would help if I wasn't on their car insurance anymore. I wasn't driving their cars anyway. I signed up for my own policy. None of this happened all at once. That's the thing. It happened across 14 months, one small adjustment at a time. By the end of it, I was paying for my own food, my own gym, my own insurance, my own prescriptions, while sleeping in their guest room and providing roughly 30 hours a week of childcare at no charge. I had become their live-in help. I just hadn't been told that's what I was. The summer my granddaughter turned 6, Amber's mother came to visit from Scottsdale. She stayed for 10 days. She slept in my room. Amber asked, very sweetly, if I'd mind taking the pull-out in the office just for the visit. I said of course not. I slept on the pull-out for 10 days. I kept my clothes in a laundry basket in the hallway. Amber's mother did not do the school pickups. She did not make dinner. She and Amber went to the spa twice, went shopping 4 times, and had lunch at a restaurant I drove past on the way to pick up the kids. They brought me back a chocolate from the dessert menu. Amber handed it to me like she was tipping someone. I ate it. I thanked her. That night I called my friend Patricia, who lives 2 streets from my Columbus house, and I talked for a long time. Patricia said, "Vivian, come home." I wasn't ready yet, but something had shifted. In September, Kyle asked me to sit down with him after the kids were in bed. He had a look I recognized from when he was a teenager and had done something he needed to tell me about. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. My posture, I noticed, was very straight. And he said that he and Amber had been thinking. The house market in Phoenix was strong, their neighborhood especially. They'd had an agent walk through just to see, and they'd been thinking about what made sense long term. With the kids growing, they could use more space, a bigger house, maybe somewhere with better schools. I waited. He said that if they sold and bought somewhere bigger, the down payment would be the challenge. And he'd been thinking. And I knew he'd been thinking about it for a while, because Kyle doesn't say things like this without having rehearsed, that maybe this was a moment where we could all benefit. He looked at me. The Columbus house, Mom. If you sold it, you'd have more than enough for your own place here, somewhere close to us, and you'd have cash left over. It would give you independence. I looked at him for a moment. Independence, I said. You'd have your own place, your own space. He was talking faster now. And honestly, the rental income from Columbus barely covers what you're putting out anyway, right? It's a wash. It was not a wash. The rental income was $1,100 a month. It was not a wash at all. I said, I'll think about it. I went to my room, the guest room, which was my room again now that Amber's mother had gone back to Scottsdale, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I thought about Raymond. He'd bought that Columbus house the year Kyle was born. He built the deck himself that summer, sweating in the August heat, measuring twice and cutting once the way his father taught him. We'd eaten every Thanksgiving dinner in that house. I'd graded 30 years of essays at that kitchen table. Kyle wanted me to sell it so he could afford a bigger house. I thought about the grocery receipts in my wallet, the gym membership I was paying alone, the 10 days on the pull-out couch, the chocolate from the restaurant. And I thought, how long have I been here? And what, exactly, has it cost me? I didn't call Patricia this time. I called a financial advisor, a woman named Ruth, who'd been recommended by someone in my old book club. I made an appointment for a Tuesday, told Kyle I was going to get my hair done, and drove to her office across town. I sat in a very clean chair across from a woman who looked at my numbers without any expression on her face, and then looked at me and said, "You're in good shape, Mrs. Vivian. Better than you may realize." She walked me through everything. The Columbus house, conservatively valued, what I was drawing from my pension, what was sitting in Raymond's 401k that I'd never touched. She showed me a number. I looked at it for a moment and felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Steadiness. The floor back under my feet. I asked her about trusts, about what it would take to restructure things so that my assets were clearly mine, clearly protected. She explained everything slowly, without condescending to me. She said she'd seen situations like mine before. I told her I wanted to move forward. I also called a real estate agent that week, not about selling the Columbus house, about buying something in Phoenix. There's a part of what happened next that I want to be careful about, because it matters. I did not yell at my son. I did not present Amber with a list of grievances. I did not make a scene or leave a note or do any of the things that part of me, the part that had been sleeping on a pull-out couch for 10 days, wanted to do. I kept showing up to the school pickups. I kept making dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept being exactly what I had been, because I didn't want Kyle to have any warning, not because I wanted to surprise him, although I did, but because I'd learned something in those 14 months. People who are using you don't stop until the supply is gone. You can't negotiate with it. You just have to change the situation. Ruth connected me with an estate attorney. His name was Gerald. He was 65, recently widowed himself, and he had a way of explaining things that was precise without being cold. I restructured my accounts. I set up a revocable living trust. I named a trustee who is not my son. I updated every beneficiary designation on every account Raymond had left me. It took about 6 weeks. In the meantime, the real estate agent, Sandra's cousin as it turned out, who'd moved to Phoenix years ago, showed me 7 properties. The 5th one was a 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community, about 4 miles from Kyle's house. 2nd floor, no neighbors above me. A small balcony facing east, morning light. I made an offer. It was accepted on a Wednesday. I drove home, started dinner, helped my granddaughter with her reading homework, and didn't say a word. I told Kyle on a Saturday morning. The kids were at a birthday party, and Amber was at the gym, and it was just the 2 of us, which was rare enough that I'd waited for it. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same chairs, and I said, "I want to talk to you about some things I've been doing." He got that look again. The teenager look. I think he already knew, somewhere in him, that he wasn't going to like this. I told him about the condo. I told him I was moving out at the end of the month. I told him I had been to see a financial advisor and that my accounts were restructured and that the Columbus house was staying exactly where it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, did we do something wrong?" I thought about that question. I thought about how to answer it honestly without being cruel, because whatever he'd become in those 14 months, he was still my son. He had still walked me to the security line and held on a little longer than usual. I said, "I think we let things happen that we should have talked about. I should have said something sooner. That's partly on me." I paused. "But I also need you to understand that I came here to be part of your family, not to be your resource." He started to say something. I kept going. The grocery bills, the insurance, the gym, the pull-out couch. I said each one gently, not like accusations, like facts. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make trouble. But I should have said something, and now I'm saying it. He was quiet for a long time. I let him be quiet. Finally, he said, "I didn't realize how much of that had piled up." "I know," I said, and I believed him, partly. I believed that Kyle, who has always been more follower than leader in his own house, had not sat down and calculated. I believed that it had happened the same way it happened to me, slowly, one small thing at a time, until the pile was very high and no one had named it. But I also believed that he had asked me to sell Raymond's house, and that was not something that had snuck up on anyone. I moved out on the last Friday of October. I hired movers. I took my books, my grandmother's quilt, Raymond's photograph, and the little succulent I'd bought myself at a gas station in month 3 because I'd needed something alive to look after. The condo smelled like new paint and someone else's cleaning products. I opened the balcony door and stood there in the morning light and felt the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, the kind that's just quiet. I set Raymond's photograph on the windowsill first, then I unpacked my books. I want to tell you about the first Sunday. Kyle called. He asked how the move had gone. We talked for about 15 minutes, a little stiff, a little careful, like two people who've rearranged the furniture and aren't sure yet how to walk through the room. He told me the kids missed me. I told him I'd take them to the botanical garden the following weekend, if Amber was okay with it. She was. We went to the botanical garden. My granddaughter held my hand the whole time. My grandson, who is 9 and has recently decided he is too old to hold hands, held it anyway when we saw the butterflies. I didn't say anything about that. I just let him. Kyle texted me afterward. They had the best time. Thank you, Mom. I looked at that text for a moment. Then I put my phone down and made myself a cup of tea and sat on my east-facing balcony and watched the sun come down behind the roofline. I wasn't angry anymore. I don't think I'd been angry in a long time, actually. Not the hot kind. Just the cold, tired kind that makes you very quiet and very careful. Now I wasn't that either. There are things I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago. I know that love and use can occupy the same space without either one canceling the other out. Kyle loves me. I believe that. He also let me become useful in ways that cost me more than he was paying attention to. Both of those things are true. I know that my willingness to keep quiet, to not make trouble, to say, of course, and whatever works for you, that wasn't selflessness. That was a habit I built over 30 years of making things smooth for other people. It served me well in a lot of ways. In that kitchen, at that table, it served me right out of my own life. I know that money, who has it, who controls it, who watches it, is not a crass subject for a woman of a certain age. It is a survival subject. I should have looked at my numbers 3 years earlier. I should have known what I had. I didn't, because I'd let Raymond handle most of it, and then I'd let grief handle most of me. And by the time I looked up, I was sleeping on a pull-out couch in a house that wasn't mine, paying for groceries I didn't choose, in a city I'd moved to because someone needed me. And I know, this is the part that took the longest, that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning the people you love. I go to my granddaughter's soccer games. I pick them up on Wednesdays now, by choice and by schedule, for exactly 3 hours. I take them for ice cream after. I am their grandmother. That is not a role that needed to live inside Kyle's guest room to be real. Ruth helped me put together a plan last spring. The Columbus house continues to rent. The income goes into an account that is only mine. My pension and Raymond's 401k are structured now in a way that Gerald explained to me with a diagram and a cup of very bad coffee. If something happens to me, my wishes are clear and they are documented and they are not subject to anyone else's interpretation. I take a painting class on Tuesday mornings at the community center attached to my building. I am not talented. I don't care. The woman next to me, whose name is Bet, has been painting for 40 years and has a very kind way of not looking at my work for too long. We have coffee after. She lost her husband 7 years ago and moved here from Michigan, and she has a daughter who calls every Sunday like clockwork. We don't talk about our children much. We talk about the light, how it changes in October, how the desert in the morning, when the air is still cool and the sky hasn't committed to its color yet, looks like something no one has gotten around to naming. Bet says she thinks painting is just paying attention, writing it down in color. I told her I used to teach that to teenagers, that writing is just paying attention. She laughed. She said, "Then we've been doing the same thing all along." Maybe we have. My son called last month to ask how I was doing, not about anything, just to ask. We talked for almost an hour. He told me about a problem at work, something with a vendor, and I listened the way I used to listen when he was in high school and had problems I couldn't solve for him. Just present, just there. At the end, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said. When you moved out." I waited. He said, "I think I let Amber run a lot of things without asking enough questions, including things involving you. And I'm sorry for that. It wasn't a complete accounting. It didn't cover the pull-out couch or the Columbus house conversation or the chocolate from the restaurant. But it was real. I could tell the difference." I said, "I appreciate that. I mean it. And then I said, "Come visit sometime. Both of you. Bring the kids. I have a balcony." He laughed. He said he would. I don't know if things between us will be easy again the way they were easy once, before Raymond died and the ground shifted and we all had to find our footing in new places. Maybe easy isn't the right word anymore anyway. Maybe the right word is honest. I can work with honest. I have my morning light. I have Bet and my terrible paintings. I have Raymond's photograph in the window, and my grandmother's quilt on the bed, and my granddaughter's hand in mine at the botanical garden. I have my name on my own front door. That's where I'll leave it. I've been thinking lately about how things accumulate, not the big things. The big things you see coming, or at least you feel them land when they arrive. Raymond's diagnosis was a big thing. The morning he died was a big thing. Those moments have weight you can hold in your hands. No, I mean the small things. The way a boundary disappears, not because someone knocks it down, but because nobody tends to it. The way you say, "of course," one time, and then again. And then it becomes the answer you always give, and eventually no one thinks to ask, because they already know what you'll say. That's what happened to me in that house in Phoenix. Not all at once. Slowly, the way water finds its way through whatever you leave unattended. I don't say this to make Kyle a villain. He isn't one. He's a man who loved his mother, and also let convenience shape him in ways he didn't examine. Most of us do that at some point. The question is whether we examine it eventually. And to his credit, he did. That phone call last month, the one where he said he'd let too many things go without asking the right questions, that cost him something to make. I know my son. I know what it takes for him to say he was wrong. But here's what I've come to understand. His willingness to apologize, when it came, was only possible because I had already moved. If I had stayed, waiting for the conversation to happen on its own, I believe we would still be waiting. Not because he's cruel, but because the situation had no pressure in it. I was there. Things were working. Why would anyone stop to examine something that's working? For them. The act of leaving was not a punishment. I want to be clear about that. I moved out because I needed to live inside my own life again, but the consequence of that decision, the thing it set in motion, was that my son finally had to look at what had been happening. When I was no longer in the guest room was just a room. When I was no longer doing the school pickups, someone else had to. When my name was no longer connected to accounts I hadn't agreed to fund, the arrangement became visible for what it was. Actions have consequences not because the universe is keeping score, but because the world is made of causes and effects, plain and practical. I changed my situation. The situation changed. That's all it was. That's everything it was. What I didn't do, and I'm proud of this, though pride feels like a complicated word for it, was make the decision in anger. I made it in clarity. There's a difference, and the difference matters enormously. Anger makes you say things you have to walk back. Clarity makes you do things that hold. Ruth in her clean office with her honest numbers. Gerald with his diagram and his terrible coffee. The real estate agent who showed me 7 condos and didn't rush me on any of them. I built something careful and solid before I said a single word to my son. That carefulness was its own kind of wisdom, I think. Not the wisdom you're born with, but the kind you earn by having been, at least once, not careful enough. I think about Bet sometimes, painting next to me on Tuesday mornings, not looking at my work for too long. She's been paying attention for 40 years. She knows things about light that I'm only starting to learn. And she got there not by talent alone, but by showing up, week after week, deciding it still mattered. That's the whole of it, maybe. Showing up, deciding it still matters. Not what other people need from you. What you in your one life still want to build. I have my name on my own front door. I have morning light on an east-facing balcony. I have my granddaughter's hand and my terrible paintings and the quiet that is not emptiness. I built that carefully and not too late.